In the summer of 2002, a demolition crew walked into a dead factory complex in Springfield, Vermont. The company that owned it had gone bankrupt that February, and the buildings, nearly 800,000 square feet of them, were being cleared out for good. Inside, among the stripped machine bays, the crew found paper, ledgers with entries running back to 1896, wartime employee newsletters, and a set of typed cards, each carrying a worker's name, his job, and a short obituary, because these were the company's own men killed in action in the Second World War. The crew stopped. Somebody made a call, and the papers that were hours away from a dumpster ended up in the Smithsonian Institution. This is the story of the company that wrote them. A company founded by a department store window dresser, run like a family for 4 generations, and taken apart so completely that its memory nearly went out with the trash. This is Trade Archive. If histories like this one are worth your time, hit like and subscribe. It costs you nothing, and it keeps this archive growing. Now, to Vermont, a century earlier. To understand how a gear company could end up mourned in the Smithsonian, you have to understand what a gear actually is. A toothed wheel of hardened steel that carries power from one shaft to another. Every automobile transmission is a box full of them. Every aircraft engine, every tank, every lathe, every clock. And in the 1880s, making them was a slow, imperfect craft. A machinist would clamp a steel blank into a milling machine, cut one tooth with a formed cutter, rotate the blank by hand using an indexing head, cut the next tooth, and repeat. Every rotation introduced a tiny error in spacing. Every cutter only approximated the true curve a gear tooth needs, a mathematical shape called an involute. Stack those errors together, and you got gears that whined, ground, wore out, and failed. Fine for a farm windmill. Fatal for the machines the 20th century was about to demand. The man who solved this problem had no business solving it. Edwin R. Fellows was born on May 29, 1865, in Torrington, Connecticut. His father, Charles, was the principal of the local high school, a man devoted to mathematics. And then Charles died, right around the time Edwin entered high school himself. The family's income died with him. Accounts differ on whether Edwin finished school at all. The Smithsonian and the American Precision Museum say he had barely a year of high school before he had to quit. Either way, the boy who might have followed his father into mathematics instead took a job at a Torrington dry goods store. He stocked shelves. He sold clothing. He arranged mannequins and merchandise behind plate glass. Edwin Fellows, the future giant of American precision machining, spent his early 20s as a window dresser. His first paid work connected to the machine trade was not machining at all. It was painting a sign for the Hendley Machine Company. His mother, now a widow, took in boarders to keep the household afloat. And this is where the story turns, because one of those boarders was a young machinist named James Hartness, the kind of man the machine tool world produces once in a generation. Hartness sat at the widow Fellows' table, watched her son, and saw something nobody else had bothered to look for. In 1889, when Hartness was hired to rescue a failing machine shop called Jones Lamson in Springfield, Vermont, he made Edwin Fellows an offer. Come north, learn the trade. Fellows said yes. Springfield, in 1889, was a mill town of a few thousand people strung along the Black River, a fast little tributary that dropped 110 feet through the village center and had powered shops there since the 1700s. Hartness turned Jones Lamson around with a single product, his flat turret lathe, and ran the place on a simple doctrine. One company, one product, done better than anyone on earth. Fellows spent his first 2 weeks running a screw machine on the floor, then moved up to the drafting department. He did his day job, but at night he worked on gears. He taught himself the mathematics his father had loved, the involutes and cycloids that define how gear teeth must curve to roll against each other without grinding. Understand what that meant for a man with his background. This was not shop arithmetic. This was the kind of geometry that university men studied. And a former window dresser was doing it by lamplight after 10-hour shifts, filling notebooks with tooth profiles. Somewhere in those nights, fellows had the idea that changed everything. The industry's whole approach to gear cutting was wrong. Everyone was trying to carve the correct tooth shape directly, using cutters that approximated the involute curve. Fellows asked a different question. What if the cutter was itself a gear? Take a gear, harden it, give its edges cutting relief, and then run it against a steel blank exactly the way two gears mesh in service, while the cutter strokes up and down like a chisel. The cutter and the blank rotate together, tooth by tooth, and the cutter generates its mating shape in the blank automatically. No templates, no indexing errors. The mathematics is built into the tool itself. A perfect gear, cutting perfect gears. The experts told him it would not work. The American Precision Museum's account uses a specific word for what fellows endured: derision. The men who had spent their lives cutting gears heaped scorn on the shop floor draftsman with his gear-shaped cutter. But Hartness did not laugh. His doctrine said that when one of his men had a product-sized idea, you did not bury it inside the parent company. You gave the man his own firm. On July 13, 1896, with backing from Hartness and a Springfield industrialist named William Woolson, the Fellows Gear Shaper Company was incorporated. Woolson took the presidency. Fellows, 31 years old, took the title of manager and the job of proving the doubters wrong. Over the following decades, Hartness would seed other firms the same way, and the cluster growing along that river would eventually earn the name Precision Valley. But that is a story of its own. This one stays inside the Fellows' gates. The first machine was built before the company even had a finished factory. Fellows contracted the Fitchburg Machine Works in Massachusetts to construct the prototype, a gear shaper with a 36-inch capacity, completed in 1896. It was experimental and never sold. The first production machine, the 6 type, went out the door in 1897 to Prentice Brothers of Worcester, Massachusetts. That same year, on March 30th, the United States Patent Office granted patent number 579,708 for a gear-shaping machine, Edwin R. Fellows, inventor. Within 2 years, the Franklin Institute awarded him the John Scott Medal, an honor whose past recipients included Thomas Edison. The window dresser now had a medal, a patent, and a company. What he did not have yet was a business. The books show operating losses in 1898 and 1899. The concept was so unfamiliar that customers shied away, and early troubles in development made acceptance harder still. The gear shaper was a solution waiting for a problem big enough to need it, and in those same years, in workshops in Detroit and Lansing and Cleveland, that problem was being bolted together. The automobile. An automobile is, mechanically speaking, a rolling argument between an engine that wants to spin fast and wheels that need to turn slow with force. The device that settles that argument is the transmission, and a transmission is nothing but gears. Not decorative gears. Gears that must mesh smoothly thousands of times a minute, underload, shifting between ratios, for years, in the hands of untrained drivers. Hand-indexed gears could not do it. Fellows gears could. The first automotive customer came knocking as early as 1898, the Electric Vehicle Company, and behind it arrived the names that would define the American century: Packard, Olds Motor Works, Cadillac, Buick. In 1900, the company developed a rack shaper. In 1902, it built a 24-inch machine, principally to cut automobile gears, and the year after that adapted the shaper for helical gears, the angled tooth design that runs quieter and stronger, exactly what automakers wanted. The losses turned to profits and never turned back. Historian Joseph Wickham Roe would later write that the Fellows gear shaper became one of the most important tools in the manufacture of automobiles. Every time the American car industry doubled, somewhere behind it, Springfield's machines were cutting the teeth. By 1911, the company was shipping 37% of its production across the Atlantic. Think about the geography of that. Precision machinery, invented by a self-taught man in a Vermont village, being crated onto ships for the industrial capitals of Germany, Britain, and France. The very countries that had taught America machining in the first place. The student was now selling to the teacher. Then, in 1914, those same customers went to war with each other, and the machine tool business changed character. Armaments demand from the belligerents piled on top of automotive demand, and when America entered the fight in 1917, the government's orders came on top of both. The works grew again, adding workshops, a dam, and a powerhouse on the Black River, and the town around it swelled with machinists. That same year, Edwin Fellows finally took the presidency of his own company, 21 years after founding it. And he kept inventing. The man held 39 patents by the end of his life, and they trace a widening ambition. Having built the machine that cut gears, he turned to the machines that could prove a gear was true. When no instrument existed that could accurately inspect the involute curve of a finished tooth, Fellows designed one, an involute measuring machine, and the company grew into a leader in optical inspection equipment alongside its cutters and shapers. There is a whole philosophy in that move. Anyone can claim precision. Fellows built the instruments that made precision checkable, which meant his customers could hold the entire industry to his standard. The product line deepened the same way. Machines for internal gears, machines for the cluster gears that other cutting methods physically could not reach, self-locking worm drive index systems, ground master gears that served as the reference against which working gears were judged. By 1924, the firm employed 700 men and could produce 100 gear shapers and 4,000 cutters every month. If a gear existed, Springfield built the machine that cut it and the machine that judged it. Then, in November 1927, the river turned on them. The same Black River the company had dammed for power rose in the worst flood in Vermont's recorded history, killing 84 people across the state. When the water receded from Springfield, the first floor of the Fellows plant had been submerged under 8 feet of it, machines and floors caked in river mud. The company dug out, dried out, and went back to work. 2 years later came a slower kind of flood. The Depression gutted the capital goods market, and nearly 400 Vermont manufacturers went under before it was over. Fellows was not one of them. Through the lean years of 1929 to 1937, the firm survived partly on exports, including, in one of history's quiet ironies, machine tool orders from the Soviet Union and from Japan. American precision, sold abroad to stay alive, was tooling up the factories of future adversaries. Hartness died in February 1934. And in 1939, Edwin Fellows, now 74, stepped back from daily management, keeping the president's title while a new war gathered on the horizon. When France fell in June 1940, Washington understood what London already knew. The war would be decided by production, and production would be decided by machine tools, the machines that make machines. You cannot make a rifle without a lathe, a shell without a grinder, or an aircraft engine without gear cutting. The government and its contractors descended on Springfield with order books open, and the Fellows plant swelled to a wartime peak of 3,300 workers. Hold that number against the size of the town. Springfield had roughly 8,000 residents, nearly half the population, working inside one company's buildings, running shifts under blackout conditions. And 400 of those workers were women, wives, and daughters who stepped up to the machines while the men shipped out, years before the country turned that image into a poster. Follow a Fellows machine into the war, and you find it everywhere. Special disking machines producing the propeller shaft webs of airplanes. the horizontal Z model cutting splines on aircraft engine crankshafts, the number 15B burnishing machine finishing helical gears for tank transmissions, the number 24 hydro gear lapper polishing propeller gears for aircraft engines, and, at the other end of the scale, the straight-line gear generator cutting fine-pitch gears, tiny watch-like teeth, for aircraft instruments, aerial cameras, and bomb fuses. The company's machines spanned gears from 100 inches in diameter down to 1/16 of an inch. From the ring gear of a battleship turret to a gear you could lose under a fingernail. In the early 40s alone, the engineering department designed 9 entirely new machine types. In 1941 and 1942, American shops delivered roughly 300,000 machine tools to the war effort, and about 30,000 of them came out of this one small town, an outsized share that bred its own wartime legends about enemy target lists. The verifiable numbers need no embellishment. One town of 8,000 people, building 1 in every 10 of the machines that made the machines. Not all of the plant's men stayed at the machines. Some went to the war their gears were arming, and some did not come back. The company recorded each loss the way a machine shop records everything on a card. A name, a department, a date, a few typed lines of obituary. File after file of them, kept alongside the production records, a quiet ledger of what the war actually cost the shop floor. Remember those cards. This story returns to them. Edwin Fellows did not live to see the victory his machines helped win. He died on May 21, 1945, 8 days short of his 80th birthday, and exactly 2 weeks after Germany's surrender. The window dresser from Torrington closed his eyes on a world where the war machine his gears had helped break lay in ruins, and where the company carrying his name stood at the absolute height of its powers. The post-war years looked, from the outside, like a golden age, and the company that entered them was still, in every sense that mattered, a family. In 1947, it unveiled a mammoth rotary gear shaper, 80,000 pounds of machine running 10 spindles at once. Ted Miller, who had joined Fellows as an apprentice back in 1898, rose to the presidency, and the founder's own son, Edwin R. Fellows II, served as general manager. 4 generations of the Fellows family would ultimately work inside the firm, and the family lore ran exactly the way you would hope, down to a grandfather who gave his bride a table saw as a wedding present. Springfield hummed around them. A machinist could walk to work, buy a house on his wage, and reasonably expect his son to follow him through the same factory gate. The high school fed the drafting rooms fed the engineering department, and skill compounded, generation over generation, the way interest compounds in a bank. The Cold War kept the order books full in its own unsettling way. In 1953, the company commissioned a formal study on how to minimize losses and resume production after a nuclear war. A gear company in rural Vermont, planning in writing for the end of the world. Later, from 1963 to 1971, the shop held a contract with Colt, the gunmaker, as another war's work ran through the machines. But underneath the prosperity, a question was building, and it was the oldest question in industrial America. Who does a family company actually belong to? For decades, Fellows was the great non-union shop of southern Vermont. The United Electrical Workers had chartered Local 218 in October 1943, after roughly 500 workers across Springfield's plants signed cards, and the union swept through the neighboring machine shops one by one. But Fellows, the biggest of them all with 2,000 employees, would not fall. In January 1945, a union business agent predicted in writing that the plant would be organized within 3 months. It took 23 more years. Drives failed in the 40s. Another push, from 1959 to 1961, failed again. In 1966, the steelworkers forced an election and lost it outright, leaving Fellows the only major non-union machine shop in the region. The company kept the unions out the old-fashioned way, with profit sharing, Christmas bonuses, pensions, insurance, merit wage systems, annual wage reviews, production bonuses, mutual benefit associations, recreation committees. Paternalism, in the full sense of the word. The company as father. And as long as the actual family ran the company, the bargain more or less held. Workers traded a union card for the belief that the people upstairs knew their names. Then, in March 1963, the family era ended. Edwin R. Fellows II stepped aside, and the new general manager was John Barbier, an outsider who came up through Ford. By 1967, he was president. Longtime machinists said the atmosphere on the floor changed under the new regime, that grievances went nowhere, that a man with a problem got put off instead of heard. And the numbers tell you what happened to the paternal bargain once the father was gone. By 1968, the average hourly wage at Fellows was $2.89. Across town at the unionized Jones Lamson plant, it was $3.68. 79 cents an hour, every hour, for the same class of work in the same town. One Fellows man retired in 1968 after 25 years of service and drew a pension of $61 a month. 25 years of loyalty, priced at $2 a day. The belief that the people upstairs knew your name had become, on paper, the most expensive thing a machinist could own. The organizing committee that finally formed inside the plant was more than 110 workers strong, and on the eve of the election, it put out a statement that reads less like a demand than a wound. They were proud of their jobs, it said, and proud of Fellows Gear Shaper. They were not proud of their wages, their insurance, or their retirements. The statement ended with 5 words, "But we intend to be." On October 24, 1968, the workers of Fellows Gear Shaper voted 472 to 355 to join the UE, ending 72 years without a union. 10 days later, the union workers at the Bryant plant across town walked out, and what followed was a 21-week strike through the dead of a Vermont winter. Fellows management stalled its own first contract negotiations, waiting, hoping the Bryant strikers would freeze and fold and prove the region's unions could still be broken. The Bryant workers did not fold. They picketed through the snow into spring, and they won. And on April 21, 1969, Fellows Gear Shaper signed its first union contract. The company was no longer a family. It was, at last, just a company. What nobody on either side of that bargaining table could see was that the real threat to all of them was not in the room. It was across the Pacific. In 1970, the firm renamed itself the Fellows Corporation, a modern name for a modernizing age. It had already built a second plant in North Springfield, and in 1974 came the change that history keeps proving fatal to companies like this one. Fellows was acquired by Hart Corporation, a Connecticut conglomerate. It was the pattern of the whole industry by then. The founding families were aging out, heirs unwilling or unable to take the helm, and selling to a conglomerate had stopped being a betrayal and become the only exit. After 78 years, the company answered to owners with no roots in the town, no memory of the founder, and no particular reason to care whether gear shapers were built in Vermont or anywhere else. Profits that had once gone back into the drafting room now went to Connecticut. What killed it, in the end, was not the union and not the conglomerate alone. It was a technology shift the company saw coming and could not catch. Through the 70s and 80s, Japanese and German builders, backed by coordinated national investment, poured capital into computer numerical control. A CNC machining center did not just cut faster and cheaper. It moved the intelligence of the work out of the machinist's hands and into the program, which meant a young factory on the other side of the world could suddenly match work that Springfield had needed 4 generations to learn. The accumulated skill of its people had been the company's whole competitive moat since 1896. CNC drained the moat. Fellows answered with its hydro-stroke machines in 1977 and its own CNC models in the early 80s. But the response was late, underfunded, and owned by people watching quarterly numbers instead of decade-long product cycles. Some in town would later blame the strikes of the 70s and the labor costs that followed them. Others the absentee owners, others the technology itself, and the honest answer is that a company can die of all three at once. The American machine tool industry as a whole was hollowing out around it through the 1980s, squeezed by imports and a brutal capital spending drought, and the old Springfield shops fell one by one, sold, gutted, their work moved out of state and overseas. As a local historian later put it, the technology just stripped what these companies were doing. In 1987, Fellows was sold again, this time to the Goldman Industrial Group, a Massachusetts holding company that collected distressed American machine tool firms the way others collected stamps. Goldman gathered up Fellows and its old Springfield neighbors and ran them together while the market underneath them kept shrinking. The model was extraction, not investment. Products aged on the price list. The engineering staff thinned. The apprenticeship pipeline that had run unbroken from the founder's drafting room went quiet, and the orders that still came were increasingly for rebuilds and spare parts, a company living off the installed base of its own glorious past. 15 years of that is exactly as survivable as it sounds. On February 13, 2002, Goldman Industrial Group filed for bankruptcy, and it did not take Fellows down alone. The filing shuttered the company's old Springfield neighbors in the same stroke, 790,000 square feet of manufacturing space across the town, an expanse of empty factory floor the size of 14 football fields. 106 years after a window dresser proved the experts wrong, the Fellows Gear Shaper Company ceased to exist. There was no final ceremony, no last machine rolled out under a banner. The doors closed on buildings still full of paper, and the town found out the way towns always find out, from lawyers and locksmiths. For a place that had organized a century of life around those buildings, the arithmetic was merciless. The walk to work, the pension, the son following the father through the gate, the entire architecture of a working life, ended in a single filing. And this is where the story catches up to its own beginning. The crew sent into those abandoned buildings was an environmental firm, Marley Environmental, and the papers they found were the company's entire memory. Ledgers in which you can watch the small losses of 1898 turn into the automobile boom. Decades of employee newsletters with names like the Fellows Cutting Stroke, the Pitch Line, the New Shaper, the small weekly heartbeat of a shop floor, bowling scores and retirements and war bond drives. And the cards of the war dead, the men the shop had sent to the front and never gotten back, each one still holding its few typed lines of obituary, sitting in a dead building, headed for a dumpster. The bank that held the property donated all of it to the Smithsonian in 2004. The archive of one of America's most important machine tool firms survives today because a demolition crew paused before throwing it away. The machines themselves refused to die. In July 2002, out of the bankruptcy, a Rockford, Illinois builder named Bourne & Koch bought the Fellows machine tool assets, the designs, the original prints, the name, while a separate firm, Star SU, took over the gear cutter business. Bourne & Koch employed engineers who came straight from the Springfield works, and they build, rebuild, and support Fellows gear shapers to this day, marketing them under the Fellows name more than a century and a quarter after the first one was created in Fitchburg. The firm holds the original prints and documents, drawings going back to the founder's own era, and states its position to customers in 3 words: "We are Fellows." The company itself changed hands again in 2023, absorbed into a larger machine tool family, and the Fellows brand went with it, still alive, still cutting. In Springfield, a service engineer trained at Fellows had founded a small firm called Gearworks back in 1995, while the old parent faded around it, and it still cuts gears inside the original factory, a candle burning in the cathedral. The trade, it turns out, never needed the corporation. It needed the skill, and a little of the skill stayed. The downtown complex on the river found a second life around 2012, redeveloped into offices, clinics, and light industry, where the heavy bays used to run, while the newer North Springfield plant filled with a window manufacturer. The riverfront site itself entered the long bureaucratic afterlife of a brownfield, federal cleanup grants working through a century of solvents in the soil. And the chemistry of the industrial age surfaced in a crueler place too. The Old Town landfill, where local industry had dumped its waste for 2 decades after the war, was declared a federal Superfund site in 1983, after families in a mobile home park built directly on top of it began complaining about the smell of their water. The testing found the signature of 100 years of machining, degreasers, and solvents seeping under their homes, and the town around it all kept the bill. Springfield, which once held the highest per capita income in Vermont, now sits far below the state median, with roughly 1 in 5 residents in poverty, fighting the blight and addiction that follow when a town's reason for existing is dismantled. The skills never fully left the valley. The jobs did. So what does the story of Fellows Gearshaper actually mean? Strip away the nostalgia, and the verdict is this. A man with 1 year of high school out thought an entire profession because he asked a better question than the experts and because one person at his mother's dinner table took him seriously. The company he built ran for 3 generations on a bargain older than the union movement, loyalty traded for belonging, and the moment that bargain was priced in cents per hour, it broke. The owners who came after treated 100 years of compounded skill as an asset on a balance sheet, and learned the hard way that it was actually a living thing, and living things die when you stop feeding them. That is the hardest lesson in American manufacturing. Skill that takes 4 generations to build can be scattered in one, and once scattered, it does not come back. But the gears Fellows cut are still turning, in restored automobiles, in museum aircraft, in machines that have outlived the company 3 times over. The teeth mesh perfectly. They always did. That was the whole point. And if you ever want to meet the company, you can. The ledgers, the newsletters, and the cards of the war dead sit in the Smithsonian's archives, filed, cataloged, and open to anyone who asks. Somewhere in those boxes is the entry for 1898, the year the books ran red and the whole idea nearly died. And a researcher can put a finger on the exact line where the automobile arrived and everything changed. The steel outlived the company, and the paper outlived the steel. The window dresser, a man who spent his youth arranging things carefully behind glass, would have appreciated how it was all laid out in the end. If this story was worth your time, subscribe to Trade Archive. There are more companies like this one, built in places you have never heard of, and we are documenting every one of them before their paper trails end up in a dumpster too. We will see you in the next one.